Well, good morning. It's so nice to see the sun. But we sang about Jesus' foundation. He is set for you to build your faith on. This foundation, it is solid. It is firm to the core. It is unshakable, it's unbreakable, and it can withstand any of the pressures that we face in this life. We sang this morning, our hope is built on nothing less. Nothing less than the foundation that Jesus put in place by his very hands, outstretched on a cross. For you and for me, Christ alone, cornerstone, the weak made strong in the Savior's love. God says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. We're reminded that when we're weak, he's strong, and that we can do all things through Christ that strengthens us. That's where we ended the sermon last week with Esther. She felt powerless at the reading of the edict, calling for her death and the death of all the Jews in the Persian Empire. She felt weak, and she questioned her part in the solution to this crisis. But Cad's foundation, she believed, was strong. And her faith was built on that solid foundation. She knew that through any situation she would have to face, her God would be on the true throne of grace. And that he is Lord of all. She knows she's going to have to step out in faith, literally. And so she goes to prayer. She asked those physically around her to pray with her. All of those in her influence, or Mordecai's influence, to pray with them, to fast for 3 days. And at the end of those 3 days, she had committed to taking those steps of faith. And she would walk into the throne room of Xerxes and begin to plead for mercy and grace from the king of the entire Persian Empire. And her words were, I will go, and if I perish, I perish. Even though it's against the law, I will go. In other words, pray, because I'm literally going to put my life in God's hands. God was in control then, and God is in control today. But Esther and Mordecai, they didn't just sit idly by and just wait for God to do whatever he's going to do. They sought guidance. They sought direction from God. And they were willing to be used by him. God always has a plan. Always has a plan. And he chooses to work through those who are willing to allow him to do his work through them. And just like Esther and Mordecai, he wants us to be invested in his plan. He doesn't want us to come with our plan and say, how are you going to make this work, God? Because I got all of this laid out. He wants us to come and say, what do you want from me? I'm willing. I will do whatever you want me to do. He wants us invested so much that we're driven to action, that we can't sit idly by. We must be seeking him in prayer. And we, as Dottie mentioned, we've got to stop talking and listen to get that plan. We should pray like it all depends on God. And then act like it all depends on us. But don't do anything unilaterally. Act according to what God has told you to do. Remember that no one is called to do nothing. No one. Just as much as no one is called to do everything. Everyone is called to do something. Not just sit by. Something. It may be as simple as a phone call. It may be as simple as sending a card. But to the person who's on the receiving end, it's not simple. It's exactly what they needed at the exact time they needed. You know why? Because that was God's plan. We need to listen to him. And that's what we're going to see displayed in the book of Esther. Today we'll be reading from Esther chapter 6. But before we get there, I want you to understand how we got there, because we ended in chapter 4 last week. Chapter 5 begins with Esther walking into the throne room of Xerxes, and she is committed to doing that. And despite not being called for 30 days, she walks into the throne room, and the king is pleased to see her. He extends that gold scepter to her. He didn't banish her, nor did he call for her death as he could have, because that was the law. He looks at her, and he's pleased, and he wants to know what her request is. And not only does he not banish her or have her put to death, he gives her this offer. What is it you want, Esther? Up to half the kingdom you can have it, whatever your request is. Do you see God's favor in that? God had a plan. Esther was watching from the front row as his plan for her was unfolding. His plan for the whole Jewish nation was unfolding right there before Esther. Now, I don't know about you, but I always like to put myself in the story. And if I were Esther, and I walked in, and I knew everything Esther knows at this point, and the king extends the scepter to me and says, what do you want, Nancy, up to half the kingdom? I'm going to be honest. I'm probably going to say, Haman's head on a platter, please. Right? We're not going to say, oh, well, I'd like to take you and Haman to dinner. That would not be my plan. So I'm pretty sure it probably wasn't Esther's plan. It was God's plan, obviously. But humanity, we want that revenge. It's just normal. Like, Haman's trying to kill me. We know that's not part of God's plan, so could you just take care of that for me? But she doesn't do that because God works in mysterious ways. So he has Esther invite Haman and the king to an intimate dinner. Haman now is going to have a private audience with the king and queen of Persia. And the king, once again, we're going to see his impulsivity. Because if I were the king, I'd be like, well, what's up? Why Haman? Well, we don't see the king ask any questions. He doesn't ask why. Why today? Why a banquet? Why Haman? He just says, okay, someone call for Haman and let's eat and drink. And that's what they did. And when the king asked her what her request is, she said, well, I only have one request. Can we do this again tomorrow? Okay. Now Haman, he's pretty full of himself at this point. He leaves, it says, in high spirits. He is in a rocking mood. The palace had just thrown a banquet. He was the only one invited. And he leaves. And there at the gate is Mordecai. And guess what Mordecai doesn't do? He doesn't give him any honor. And so Haman is just filled with rage at this point. He's livid. But he thought, you know what? I'm just going to go home. I'm going to deal with you, but I'm going to go home. And he goes home and he vents. And we see that despite Haman having great wealth, Haman had the highest honor. He had rank. He had everything the world could offer him except Mordecai's allegiance. He had just been honored by the queen and the king of Persia. That wasn't enough. That wasn't enough for him. Worldly things will never be enough when you're trying to fill a God-sized void. It will never be enough. And you can read how he says this in chapter 5, verse 13. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. He goes home and he tells his wife, I know I have all these things going on with you, but there's that Mordecai, and I am not happy because of this one man. I can have everything else, but not his allegiance, and it just drives me crazy. And so she says, well, I have an idea. Kill him. I'm sure the king will let you do that. I mean, just build some gallows and go ask the king for permission. I mean, he already gave you his signet ring last week. Just do whatever you want to do. Just ask him. I'm sure he'll say, okay, he's not going to question anything. So Haman's like, that is a great idea. And he goes out and he builds these gallows, 75 feet tall. 75 feet. Overnight, builds these gallows. And he goes to bed like, I have a plan. And so we see that he's going to have this plan, but the remarkable work about God always has a plan, and evil will not win. Evil is about to be overturned by good here in our story, and it will not be foreseeable by the events that we're playing out on God's stage. You see, when it comes to evil, God's plan will appear and it will happen without notice most of the time. Most people don't even notice it's coming. Despite the fact that we have warnings, we're like, oh, it happened. And that's what we're going to be reading from this morning, from that point. Esther chapter 6, if you have Bibles with me this morning. We'll be starting at verse 1. We're going to read the whole chapter. That night, the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who had guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. The king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had erected for him. His attendants answered him, Haman is standing in the court. Well, bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? So he answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor? Oh, have them bring royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden with one of those royal crests placed on its head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man and the king delights honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for a man the king delights to honor. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse and do as you have suggested for Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. So Haman got the robe and the horse, and he robed Mordecai, led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. And while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. May God bless the reading of his word. So, here we have King Xerxes. And he has this wonderful banquet with his wife and his best friend Haman, and he goes to go to bed. And he has a case of insomnia. He can't sleep. Maybe he's got what's on his mind, what's Esther going to ask for. Maybe he ate some food that wasn't agreeing with him. We don't know. We also don't know why Esther did not choose to bring her request before the king the first night. Nor should we try to come up with a reason for why. What we do know is whatever the reason, she delayed it for more than a day, and it turned out to be significant because God was in it. The king's sleepless night became a crucial turning point in the story, all part of God's plan in history, or as I say, his story. Now, I know there's people who believe in coincidences. I am not one of them. And this story gives credence to why. I mean, first you have a queen who doesn't make her request known upon entering the throne room, and then doesn't make her request upon the first night of the banquet. She asks for a second private dinner. Then you have the king who just so happens can't sleep that night. And then he asks, in lieu of, warm milk or a hot bath or a harpist playing, he asks for the Chronicles to be read to him. And I had to kind of chuckle, because when I was younger, well, still now, I don't like to read much. And so I had a lot of English assignments I had to do, and my mom would read to me. It worked. I fell asleep every time. And then I'd wake up and I'd say, Heathcliff who? Which Catherine? Yeah, she had to help me write the reports too. But he had these chronicles read to him, and they were the chronicles of the history of his reign. Now, at this point, King Xerxes has reigned for 12 years. So this is not a small book. And he asked for these chronicles to be read, and guess what? They just so happen to open to that page where they're going to read about Mordecai reporting and exposing a real assassination attempt on the king. And you can read about that in Esther chapter 2. So that very night, God's plan included making the king aware of this otherwise unrewarded event that took place 5 years ago. 5 years ago. and resulted in saving his life. Pretty important event for King Xerxes. But again, this oversight on humanity, in our standards, we think, well, where was God when Mordecai saved him? I mean, Mordecai's still sitting at the king's gate. Mordecai's whole Jewish nation is going to be killed. Mordecai did the right thing, and it didn't do him any good. And Haman keeps moving up the ladder. Those evil people just keep moving up the ladder. We've all seen it happen. And sometimes we see those injustices, and we feel slighted, and we wonder, where's God? Why isn't he caring about me? And we trust ourselves to take on our plan. But I'm going to tell you from this story, learn this. Trust the author of your life, because he knows how it ends. Trust him every page of your story. If Mordecai had been properly rewarded, or rewarded at all for that matter, for this assassination reporting, this would be a non-event. It would just be another page that night in the Chronicles of the King's reign. Nothing would have happened. Nothing would have been needed to be done. But that was not God's plan. Now, due to the significance of the event and the lapse of time, King Xerxes is compelled to do something, and to do something immediately. This man saved the king's life, and the fact that nothing was done to honor him was unacceptable to King Xerxes. The king felt obligated. We've got to do something. We've got to do it now, and we've got to do it properly. And that set the stage for the next turn of events. God's plan was continuing to unfold, even without Esther now at center stage. Because Esther was probably sound asleep in her bedchambers. And we see God is still very much at work. God doesn't need to go to sleep. He's working 24/7 for each one of us. And as the king wondered what should be done for Mordecai, he wanted to talk to someone of the importance of this oversight. We've got to correct this. I need someone I can talk to. But who of all the people, now I showed you how big the empire, all the people in the empire walks into the courts at that exact moment? Haman. Coincidence? If you still believe them at this point, no. That was not a coincidence. Haman was not scheduled to be back to the palace until that evening banquet. But you see, he had a plan. He had a plan to deal with Mordecai. And he felt the urgency of his request, and he needed to go to the king like, right now. I have to go talk to this king about what I'm going to do with Mordecai. And it says in verse 4, now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai in the gallows he had erected for him. So here we see, we have the king, we have Haman, and they're going to meet. An unscheduled, unarranged meeting with complete contrasting agendas. I mean, the king wanted to honor Mordecai, and Haman wanted to kill him. Can you see God's plan unfolding right there in the king's court? And the fact that neither of these men sought God's guidance on anything they were doing. And they're all going to be right here, center stage, as God unfolds his plan. And we see that this book of Esther shows us anything that God always has a plan, and his plan will always be fulfilled down to the last detail, even when humanity seems to be completely unaware. Crucifixion of Jesus is evidence of this as well. Having just celebrated St. Patrick's Day, a day about luck, we'll see that luck has nothing to do with God's plan or his story. Ever. Esther wasn't lucky to be queen. Mordecai wasn't lucky to overheard the assassination plot. It wasn't by chance that Esther prepared a banquet and then delayed her request, or that the king realized he never rewarded Mordecai. Nor was it a coincidence that Haman was the first one to enter the courts that exact moment. All of these events, even delayed events, were orchestrated by God in his time, without prior knowledge of men. And so when we're struggling with prayers that seem to be going unanswered, prayers that are delayed, remember, God's timing is perfect. And then comes the question in verse 6. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Again, do you think it's a coincidence that the king doesn't mention any names or events? Just kind of leaves that open. And Haman's answer would have been totally different if the king had mentioned Mordecai by name or the event. But the king doesn't. And now we take each one of these events by themselves, and they may seem insignificant. And that's where we live our lives day to day. One event here, one event there, and we just see our little squares at a time. And this is where the events in our lives are unfolding. And sometimes we wonder, how's God going to use this? What's God going to do over here? What's going on in the bigger picture? And often we go through life and we just wonder, like, I don't understand God, why I'm going through this, or how I'm going to deal with this, or until we get all the way through it. And I know most of us have been there, and we look back and we go, oh, now it makes sense when we're on the other side of it. But the key part is every step of the way, we got to trust God. We got to trust God. It may not make sense to our head, our minds, our eyes, our ears, but trust the author. Because someday you're going to be on the other side and say, oh, I get it. Thank you, Jesus, for guiding me through that. So while at the time these details of the story they unfold, they seem rather unimportant. The timing of the events, the things that were done or said, or the things that weren't done or said, or the delay, they were all instrumental in God's plan. God always has a plan. In Isaiah 55:9, we're told, his ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts higher than our thoughts. You see where humanity's ways were? They're over here building gallows. You see where humanity's thoughts are? Haman's over here thinking, I'm the man he wants to honor. Who else could it be but me? That didn't line up with God's plan, just so you know. Haman is for sure that this man the king has inquired to honor must be him, and his events all seem to line up. I mean, he was given the highest status over all the nobles. He's been invited not once, but twice to these private parties. I mean, who else but me? It's me. And notice Haman doesn't inquire either. Well, what man are you talking about, king? He just answers with the how. How to honor this man. And he goes all out. Royal robes the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, and the crest on the horse, and nobles to don the robe, and lead him down Main Street and shouting honor. And notice Haman doesn't ask for anything that has any lasting value. Nothing. Just the applause of the world. That's what he wanted. And if that's what we seek here on earth, let me tell you, even if we get it, the applause will stop, the praises will end, and you will have nothing. Nothing. But Haman's filled with pride and arrogance, and that is how he got to this point. Everything he desired was to stroke his own ego. Can you imagine how he must have felt when he was just visualizing all these things being done for him? He visualized himself putting on the robe, himself being on the horse with that crest, people praising him as he walks down the street. And I'm sure he just closed his eyes and he could just picture it. He could feel the excitement. And then the king announced, Mordecai the Jew is who you're supposed to do that for. Now imagine that moment in the courtyard. Because we've all been there where, your stomach feels like it goes to your throat and you're going to throw up. I'm sure that's probably what Haman felt at that moment. But the timing was significant. The king had already issued a command. Haman didn't have time to think about the reason he was so urgently running to the courtyards, but he was in utter shock when the king commanded. It was final. There was no changing the edict at that point from the king. There was no discussion, no sidestepping it. The man he wanted to hang on the gallows is now the man that the king wanted to honor. And it would be Haman who would get the horse. And Haman who would have to go get the royal robes. And because of his own arrogance and the pride in his own words, the world placed him at center stage. And it would be Haman who would have to don those robes onto Mordecai, because he was the most noble of princes in the empire. And it would be Haman who would have to lead Mordecai down the street, praising him all the way. Tell me God doesn't have a sense of humor. When we seek after what the world has to offer, we too will find that who the world worships can be replaced in a heartbeat. The world's foundation is like shifting sands, and when the rain comes down, and it will, your foundation will crumble if it's built on the world. But the tide has started to change. The king is now recognizing the Jews because of Mordecai's gracious act to warn him of the plot to kill him. The king now has a new admiration for the whole Jewish nation because of one man. So the next time you say, who am I? I'm just one person. Remember Mordecai. He was just one person that had God at the center of everything he did. And all the individual pieces, they're starting to come together at the right place, at the right time, to form God's masterpiece of his plan. And without Esther's delay in exposing Haman's plot, the king may not have been in that right frame of mind to make the right decision about the edict. Without the sleepless night, the king would not have known about Mordecai's good deed in the court at the exact time Haman would show up. Without an agenda, the king was looking for advice. It's not an isolated incident, but every small part coming together at the right time for the right matter, contributing to the fulfillment of God's plan. For any of these events to not take place, something else would have had to change to make that happen. But I want us to see the message that while we may not always understand each and every isolated event that we go through, God is still unfolding our plan for our lives. He has a plan for each one of us. Haman succeeded in fooling the king into signing that irreversible law on that certain day, and it would be open season on all the Jewish people. They would be rounded up, murdered. And to squelch any opposition, his agenda went up a little bit. Let's just get rid of Mordecai before any of that happens. That was Haman's plan. And from our point of view, if we were living in those times, we would see that was the end of the Jewish race. We would see it as hopeless. Nothing could be done. All the pieces were falling into place for their destruction. All was lost. You ever been there? You ever felt like that? Bankruptcy. You've gotten hopelessly behind on your bills and there's nothing left but to file. Or divorce. Papers have been signed, the court date's set. Or the medical report comes back and it's not good. All the deadlines have come and gone. This is it. What are you going to do? Remember what I told you. Our God will never leave you, nor forsake you, no matter what you are facing. It's tough. It's a tough thing in this world to remember when you're right there in the middle of the chaos of your life. But you have to cling to your hope that's built on nothing less than Jesus Christ and his foundation. God has a plan for your life. But you have a choice. Those are pivotal times in our life that we have to make the choice. Are you going to give in to the inevitable? Or are you going to trust God? That God's up to something and he's unfolding your plan. It's a tough choice sometimes. But we make it whether we know it or not. Now that doesn't mean because we trust God, everything's going to be Pollyanna circumstances and everything's going to be sunshine and roses. But God's plan will always be better than any plan you could come up with. On your own. Guaranteed. Is God real? Yes. Does he know what he's doing? Yes. You just need to know a little thing about a big God. When all seems lost, it's not. Think about how God has worked in your life up to this point. Using the most trivial events to bring you where you are today. All the twists and turns to guide and direct you. It's crazy how he does it. We can't control it. When you look back, you're thinking, there's no way I could have gotten to this point on my own. I would have never made that decision. If this hadn't happened, I wouldn't have done this. We don't even know he's doing it. And he's working even when we don't see it. But that's how he works the best. And then we realize that he's still doing it. And that's why it's important to be obedient to him when he directs you. That's why it's important not to become hard-hearted or stuck in your ways. That's why it's important to keep him close with prayer and Bible study. Because he wants to direct your life in the little things. And you may not know what God's up to, but just let me tell you this. It's something good. It's always going to be something good God has for you. There's 3 ways in this lifetime to be rewarded. 1, Allow God to reward you. That's the best way, because that has eternal consequences that you want. 2, we can be rewarded by letting others reward you. And yes, that's kind of satisfying in time, but it isn't quite good enough, because how many of us have trophies or medals that are now in the garage, the basement, or the garbage? All of those rewards we were given by men here on earth are going to decay. And the third way is try to reward yourself. And that's what Haman's trying to do in our story. This is the worst way to gain reward, and it's all at the root of temptation. More people have destroyed their lives and the lives of others trying to reward themselves. It's amazing, at the end of the day, all the pageantry and honor from the palace didn't affect Mordecai in the least. Read the story. Where does Mordecai go when the parade's done? Right back to the king's gate, where he is praying for the deliverance of his people. He goes, their value and their character to those people are deep, but so's the world's. Haman, on the other hand, he's humiliated. And we see he rushes home, because the last time he was home, he was bragging about all that he was to his wife and his friends, and now he kind of slides under the door and he's whining about his terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. It was horrible. He's telling his wife and his friends about that. You know, the Hamans of this world will always do that. They will always blame everybody else. Everybody else for their misfortunes. Never taking responsibility for their own actions. It's never, well, God taught me a valuable lesson, or through this I gained this understanding, or God allowed me to be broken so I would draw closer to Him. They never get to that point. No, it's instead of, if it hadn't been for Him, I would have had everything. Or if so-and-so hadn't done this, everything would have worked out right. It's always playing the victim, never realizing the reality that they're a victim of their own arrogance and pride. Scripture sends us a warning, like I said, and so many people miss it. But in Proverbs 21:6, it says, there is no wisdom, no insight, and no plan that can succeed against the Lord. There is no wisdom, no insight, no plan that can succeed against the Lord. Proverbs 21:6. And in Romans 8:31, it said, if God is for us, who can be against us? And yet those warnings are ignored every single day in our world. Now there's one last thing you need to know about God from our story. And it's really the whole theme of the book of Esther. When God seems absent, He's so present. He's still very much a part of your life. Even when you think God has left the building, God shows Himself unmistakably, proving He's still in charge. In the end, no matter what you or I, or a king, or a government, or a nation does, God is going to have the final say. And He has a plan. He's not impressed with pride or prestige. He's not impressed with wealth or fame. He's not pushed around by dictators, not even pushed around by Satan, because He's in charge. The world is His stage. He's the director of the universe, and nothing escapes His notice. Not even little old me in Kalkaska, Michigan. He's on the job 24/7. And Mordecai and Esther knew that. Haman never got it. So the question today is, if you want to win your life, which side are you on? Are you on His side? Otherwise, you're fighting a losing battle. God always has a plan, and if you've talked to Him recently about what His plan is for your life, you'll know. But if you haven't, I encourage you to do that today. Our altars are always open in this church. To humble yourself before God, to share your heart, whatever's on it, with Him. And last week, Esther shows us that God has a plan. Satan has a plan. You have a choice. And God has the answers. It's time to tell him, I'm all in. I'm all in, God. Whatever it is. Stand with me as we close. Our scripture tells us from Proverbs 18, before his downfall, a man's heart is proud, but humility comes before honor. And the first half of that verse applies to Haman, the second half applies to Mordecai. What a difference. An incredible difference comma makes. In Proverbs 29:23, it gives the same message. A man's pride shall bring him low, but the humble in spirit will retain honor. So ask yourself this morning, on which side of the comma am I living? The proud, self-rewarding side, or the humble, God-rewarding side? I was reminded this week that Esther literally put her life on the line, trusting God. And I have a hard time asking the cashier, can I pray for you? I want to be on the right side of that comma. God wants you to be a part of his plan. Are you ready to be all in? Because today's the day. Talk to him about his plan for your life. And then take time and listen to his answer. He's got a plan that's unique to you and only you. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, God, you created us, and so you know how we work. It's so easy for us to doubt your plan. Even if you had written it and put it on our kitchen table, we would still wonder. You gave us your word. You've already written it. And so today, Lord, I just ask for the courage to step out in faith. For me, and for all those hearing this. Your plan is not for anyone to sit on the sidelines. We are in a war. With you as our commander-in-chief. You know every strategic move we need to make. You know when we need rest. You guide, you direct us. But so many times we get in the busyness of life and we don't take the time to ask, Lord, what is it you'll have me do today? Or sometimes, Lord, you tell us what we should do, and sometimes we say, oh, I can't do that. Help us to have the boldness that we need. Sometimes we have really good intentions and then we forget. And then we kick ourselves and then we don't do it at all. Lord, just help us be all that you created us to be. Help us to seek you first every day, every moment. Help us when we think we can't do what you're asking us to do. Help us to see Esther. Put on her robe and step into that throne room, saying, if I perish, I perish, but this is what God has asked me to do, and I'm doing it. Help us to have that boldness. Because, Lord, when people are bold for you, the world changes. The tides turn, and the Hamans don't succeed. But when the Mordecais and the Esthers sit by, your heart breaks. Help us to glorify you in everything we do, everything we say. And Lord, I know there's people today that are listening that are struggling right now with your plan for them. Unfold it before them, one event at a time, and guide their steps. Direct them in the way that they should go. We thank you and we praise you for who you are. We ask all of this in your precious Son's name, Jesus Christ.